Welcome back to the Exit Velo podcast. I'm Adam Cohen alongside Henry Winkelhake. And Henry, you're starting to look like Raleigh Fingers, and that's always a great way to see you. And first off, before we get into the show where we talk about Tatis getting paid, our top 10 second baseman, first off, how are you, Henry?
I'm doing well. Raleigh Fingers is an interesting comparison, man. This is kind of uncharted territory for me in terms of facial hair length, and I can't say I've ever gotten that or anything remotely close to that before, but I appreciate it. You know, anytime you're compared to not only a baseball Hall of Famer, but perhaps a facial hair Hall of Famer, I'm feeling pretty good about that. But how are you doing this weekend, Adam?
I'm doing pretty well, so it's good to see that we're on opposite ends of the facial hair spectrum since I just shaved before coming back to college, so back at Allegheny, and that feels pretty good just to see all my buddies, and very lucky to be here, especially during the pandemic too.
Yeah, good to hear it, man. Glad to hear you're doing well. And you know, we are a podcast that spans all parts of the country. Usually, when Ben Rossi joins us from the West Coast, but we're a podcast that spans all parts of the facial hair spectrum as well. So we're covering it from all sides, folks.
Oh yeah, for sure. And speaking about people who have had good weeks, Fernando Tatis Jr. got a 14-year, $340 million contract extension. And this is really unheard of because he's not the most highest paid player of all time, but this guy has only played like about 140 games. It's completely insane. And Henry, what were your initial thoughts on this? Was this contract justified? Was it too soon? Was it too much? Let me hear what you have to think about it.
It is quite the vote of confidence for a guy who has yet to play 162 games. I know that's something that we talked about in the shortstop preview last week. But I love the segue to, by the way, somebody who's having quite the good week. He is having quite the good week with a $340 million contract. I think he's still something like 22, 23 years old. He's a young man who has his future sorted out for him, but just in terms of looking at the deal, I don't really have too strong of an opinion one way or the other as it being pro Tatis or pro Padres. I think it kind of looks pretty fair, which is remarkable anytime you have this huge blockbuster type of deal, but it breaks down to about, I think, $24.5 million per year, which I think seems fair-ish. There's certainly a possibility that Tatis can elevate his play and end up being worth more than that. But just, I mean, the security that you get in a 14-year contract, of course, all guaranteed and with MLB contracts as opposed to when we look at NFL contracts, not quite the same thing. But, I mean, it strikes me as a pretty good deal. And good for the Padres for locking up your kid and securing the future.
It's definitely a win-win because the Padres get to retain their shortstop and arguably one of the best shortstops in the game for years and years to come. I mean, that's left side of the infield with Manny Machado and now Fernando Tatis Jr. is locked up for a long time. They're really going to be Padres for life at this point. So kudos to them for locking up their young player. And it's interesting too because Tatis Jr. his salary will increase. He's not going to get $24.5 million right away. He'll get a few million here and there because again, he would have been just before arbitration eligibility. So he's going to keep increasing. I think he'll get as high as $36 million. Nevertheless, I initially thought, yeah. So it won't be 24.5. That's what the average annual value will be, but his height of heights will be $36 million. Now, I still think this is a lot of money because, again, Mike Trout didn't have this money when he was 23. Bryce Harper didn't have it. Maybe this just is a new era of locking up young players. Probably also to do with the pandemic and making sure players get paid. I'm sure players want to have financial safety also before the CBA agreement too. Yet this is a lot of money to give to a player once again who has proven himself, but not for very long.
Certainly. And you know, given that we haven't seen Tatis do it for years and years, kind of with a proven track record, granted, I mean, it certainly does look like he has all the talent in the world. Still a little bit of a risk in that regard is who has any idea what he's going to be 14 years from now, 5 years from now. I mean, we think he's going to be one of the best players in the world, the face of the game, and I think it's justified. I'm not saying it's like a bad deal for the Padres or anything, but kind of scary to tie the future 14 years out to any one given player, no matter how amazing he is, no matter how many video game covers he's on, no matter how many highlight plays he's making. But I mean, if there is a guy to dish out a 14-year contract to, you want a young, talented guy like Tatis who has shown immense talent, immense upside. So I do think it makes sense from that regard. And I appreciate the clarification too, that it's not just a straight 24.5 million across the life of that deal. Is the 36 million, is that more, that's closer to the back end of the contract?
I think so. I don't know how quickly he's going to get 36 million, but it'll be, I think, a few years from now. Yeah, most players don't receive in the double-digit million figures until 2 years into their tenure with the team, not just 3 years in. So Padres at least going safe that route. But I hear what you're saying because he is of the right age to do this. He does have the talent to deserve this type of contract. But I think what's concerning for a lot of Padres fans is that they don't have a lot of financial resources over the next few years. They can't go out and continue to improve their team. Sure, they'll have Mike Clevenger come back next year, but why couldn't they have given this contract to Tatis Jr. 2 years from now or 3 years from now? It probably would be about the same amount, but they did this so early on, and that's my concern there.
I think that's a fair point, too. I mean, anytime you're dishing out a third of $1 billion, you do have to worry about some of the implications, perhaps hamstringing some other moves you'd like to do down the line. But I think it's such the amazing offseason that they've had thus far. They're kind of in a position to be able to do that where, you have Darvish for the next 3 years. I believe they've got Snell for the next 3 or 4 years. I know you mentioned they have Machado locked up. They have Hosmer locked up for a long time as well. I know it's at least another year or two of Mike Clevenger. So it's not like we're going to finish the 2021 season and then the Padres are all of a sudden going to fall off a cliff because of this deal. I think maybe you look 2-3 years down the line, that could be where they start to run into trouble. But hey, man, if you win a World Series somewhere in that time frame, I think it's all worth it. And then you've got an amazing player and who should be an amazing player. It's still a little bit left to be proven, but maybe you go out and win another couple more World Series over the lifetime of this deal.
Honestly, I really like how both teams in the NL West, the Dodgers and the Padres, are both in this World Series or bust mode. They're not really caring about their financial standpoint for the time being. They're saying they're throwing that into a win for now. In a couple of years, it's going to bite them in the butt. Everyone knows it because they have such a talented young core, and they're all going to get paid. But for the time being, they're just trying to win it all, and you can't blame them because World Series are hard to come by these days. No one's repeated since 99 and 2000 when the Yankees, of course, did it, but maybe one of these teams between the Dodgers and Padres can start to repeat again.
Definitely a couple of dynasties coming into fruition there. The Dodgers much closer, obviously, in the success they've had over the last decade. But the Padres looking like they're doing that conversation, certainly. And that absolutely is refreshing to see teams just spending money and going for it, given the current financial landscape of this game where there's so many teams just kind of hiding in their shells, afraid to dish out long-term contracts, afraid to take risks and make moves. It's refreshing to see teams spending a little bit of money and trying to win baseball games, because isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah, and just with how baseball is nowadays, you don't really see at least half the league going for it. It's really 5 teams putting all their finances on the table, maybe even less than that. The other 5 who are like fringe contenders, and that's it. Maybe it'll change if baseball goes to 16-team playoffs again or 14-team playoffs or just increase their playoff format. But for the time being, there's a very lopsided teams in baseball. You have the Dodgers on one hand, the Pirates on another hand, for example, and a lot of teams are trying to rebuild, and a lot of teams, and only a couple of teams are really going for it.
And I can't really, off the top of my head, imagine if there's anything coming in the next CBA that may impact the distribution of power in the game. But it'd be interesting to keep an eye out for, see what happens with those negotiations. If there's, at least something that can perhaps incentivize more equal spending throughout the league, where you don't have such a concentration of spending, a concentration of power. Everybody likes a nice competitive league where there's more teams you could see winning World Series and at least more teams trying to win a World Series. But like I said, I'm not sure what exactly that would be, but something to watch for, because there's certainly quite the CBA fight looming on the horizon after the
I'm happy you brought up that point. And yeah, for sure, because I do wonder if they will try to put in a salary cap or try to give more advantages to teams that don't have as many financial resources, or are trying to get more teams to compete. That is not one of the more major arguments I would say that's heading into it, but it's certainly an important one.
Hey, we'll see, man. And I just hope that we don't have a labor stoppage. It's my main hope for those CBA agreement, the CBA fight that is looming, I should say. I think most baseball fans are kind of in that boat. We know it's going to get ugly, but just give us as many games as possible for 2022.
Exactly. I was sick and tired of the 60-game season from the moment it started. I mean, I'm still happy that a season happened and it was a fun year in baseball, at least. But I'm ready for 162, and especially with spring training happening in a week, pitchers and catchers have already reported. It's going to be a fun year, and a lot of really good rivalries between Dodgers Padres, Braves Mets, Yankees Rays, White Sox Twins, a lot of different divisions too, which is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I mean, all things considered, I ranted for a little bit about the lack of spending in baseball, and I feel like the game is in a pretty good place right now, man.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting too, because I wonder if we'll see a new wave of all these contract extensions for younger players. There's a whole list on MLB.com about the next 8 players who can receive.
Messing up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? You're frozen on my end, if you can hear me.
Sorry. I just switched over from LTE to Wi-Fi. Am I doing better?
Oh, you're still lagging a little bit, but I think it's getting better.
Adam, do you read me?
Yeah, I can read you. I can hear you fine. It's just coming in and out.
Gosh. Folks, if you can hear me, I'm trying to switch back to Wi-Fi. We were having technical difficulties, and I think it may be on my end, and I hope I'm not talking over my colleague right now. Adam, hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I think you're good now. So I appreciate you working through this. I know it's been a weird week for you technologically, and you're doing this over your phone. So I do appreciate you working with this. So,
yeah, full discretion to the audience. I kind of fried my laptop earlier in the week.
You had a very fun birthday party, right?
But here we are. Oh, yeah. It's still a great birthday. I got to hop on the Exit Velo podcast, so I feel very blessed for that, but not so happy about frying my laptop. But Apple Cares is taking care of it, so we'll be back in business and hopefully with less technical difficulties moving.
Thank goodness for Apple Care. They're really coming in clutch. And speaking about clutch players, for example, players who could be up for extension, one of these players that was mentioned by MLB.com and a lot of speculation that they could receive an extension is Juan Soto. And I can't even imagine what his extension would look like, because it has surpassed Tatis Jr. Not only is Soto younger than him, he's more proven than Tatis Jr. He seems like he's a bit more reliable, at least offensively, than Tatis Jr. I can really see within the next year or two something like a 15-year, $400 million deal, because I feel like he's going to surpass him, and he's going to surpass him with a decent amount of money too.
I agree that the money has to be more than what we saw in the Tatis deal, where I think the years rather in this deal is where I will disagree. Is I'm near these $14 extension, or I'm sorry, not 14, 15 mil, or 14, 15 year extensions, I should say. I don't know if those are necessarily going to be the norm moving forward, because I think guys are still going to maximize the number of times they hit free agency. But I do think that the money will end up being more certainly on an average annual value basis for Juan Soto. But I don't know, maybe it's something more in the 10-year range or perhaps even less than that. But definitely more money on an annual basis, I would say, for Soto. But that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up as well, Adam. When I saw this, I immediately my beloved Javier Baez and what this would mean for a potential Cubs extension for him. And maybe that's less money than Tatis. I mean, he's a more established player than him, but he's on the top of the world now, like Tatis is. So there's definitely some ripples around the league that we're going to have to consider from this deal and see how this means for a wide variety of players.
For sure, and I agree with you. 14-year deals are. I mean, I think that might be the longest non-Bobby Bonilla contract in like MLB history. So this is amazing for Tatis Jr. And I think for Soto, you're right. He probably won't receive a $14 million deal, but he might receive a 10-year, $350 million deal, for example, with a couple of opt-outs. That could very well be a possibility. And
that sounds more like it to me. And I think a player of Juan Soto's caliber, more proven, and I'm sorry, Adam, I was interrupted. I'm sorry. My Wi-Fi is still messing up, man.
No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, a player of Soto's caliber, I think it would make sense to have a little bit more flexibility in that contract in terms of opt-outs and a shorter period of the deal, giving him more of an opportunity to hit free agency at a time where he would still be in line to get another mega deal, perhaps.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Of course, you want to capitalize on your finances, and he's from the DR as well. And I know a lot of players from the DR like to give back to the community, like to help out their towns and cities they came from. And a lot of times they're impoverished too. So perhaps that's never extra reason why Juan Soto would want to secure the bag, and having multiple free agencies would certainly help him out.
Absolutely. We're going to keep our eyes peeled on any potential extensions coming down the line. And we're certainly going to be considering them in the context of the Tatis deal. It does kind of make you look at some previous extensions that have already happened throughout the league, and would hate to Ronald right now or Ozzy Albies.
Yeah, it's a very tough situation for those two because Acuna, I believe he signed an 8-year, $100 million extension. I think it's a couple of opt-out or club options as well. And he deserves a similar type of deal to Tatis, perhaps even a little bit more. So he maybe could have bet on himself. But again, usually players don't even have that high of an extension. And he was still young at the time. So this is really unheard of, once again, that someone like Tatis Jr., who's very young, gets this type of mega deal.
Shoot, I think my Wi-Fi is still messing up, but yeah, I'm definitely still at this point. I'm on my work computer as well. I'm sorry, folks. Thank you for bearing with us with the technological difficulties tonight. We're going to do our best to make it work, but it is an interesting comparison to the Ronald Acuna situation as well. That he wasn't another young unproven player, and I mean I don't think he was that much younger or that much more unproven than Tatis though, and Tatis seems to get quite the more vote of confidence than Acuna ended up getting, which is interesting. But the Braves maybe are just very, very good at negotiating player contracts, or maybe Acuna's agent is good at that.
That's true. Braves probably saw that Acuna had talent right away. I'm not exactly sure when they made the extension, but I think it was within his first year or slightly before then. And once again, this type of contract extension from this young of an age is unheard of for Tatis. So Acuna's was large at the time, but even at the time, people thought that he should make more money. So the Braves fleeced him. They had him under team control, and it's a huge. This is like a indirect win for the Braves, essentially.
That's true. The Braves certainly set up for the future with the way they have their finances taken care of. A lot of team-friendly deals over there. And they're going to be duking it out with those Padres for years to come in the National League. So it'll be interesting to see those dynamics play out over time. Adam, I think I am definitely still lagging here. So if you can hear me clearly and on time, I'm going to attempt to leave the broadcast studio and see if I can. So I trust you to keep the show going in the meantime. I will attempt to be.
Okay, so I'll carry forward for the next few minutes while Henry tries to get back on. So once again, I really apologize, folks, on Exit Velo's behalf for the lag. A lot of technical difficulties when we're talking a couple hundred miles away, but nevertheless, let's get to the next part of our segment. So 3 players this week retired. It was Cody Allen, Brian Dozier, and Tim Tebow. And yes, you heard the last part correctly. Tim Tebow, the football player, former Heisman Trophy winner, he also retired. We'll get to him last. So let's first start with Cody Allen. And he had a very successful career. He amassed 153 saves between 2012 and 2019 with the Indians and the Angels. He's also the Indians' closer during their 2016 World Series run, and he had 3 straight 30-save seasons. And let's see if we can get Henry back in now. How's it going, Henry?
It's going well. Am I going well on time and clearly? Am I lagging?
You're still lagging a little bit, but it's a lot less than before. So I think we can work with this.
Okay, cool. I sincerely apologize for the difficulties tonight. Thank you for bearing with me, Adam, and thank you, audience, as well, for putting up with this. It has been a rough technology week, but hopefully looking better from here on out.
Happens to the best of us, man. I mean, I've been here before on previous episodes, so no worries. I was just talking about how Cody Allen retired and how he had a really successful run. Went to the World Series with the Indians in 2016, amassed 153 saves in his 8-year career. He was really lights out for a good span of 4 or 5 years, and it was really sad how his career kind of came to a rapid end. Had to struggle with the Indians in his last season with Cleveland, and then he also couldn't really handle it with the Angels, and that was it. Happened really fast.
And that, I think, is kind of symptomatic of a larger movement in the game where a lot of veterans seem to be kind of phased out before their time and maybe not making it as deep into their careers as we had previously seen in past decades. It's perhaps a factor of the analytic movement where sentimental value of what a guy's been to your franchise, to your team, to the game as a whole doesn't mean as much as the data on the hard data, the stats on the page. And I mean, Cody Allen had been declining, but it's weird. I thought he still had more in the tank. He was only 32 years old. I was kind of excited to see my Cubs give him a minor league deal last year. I thought he may be able to contribute to the bullpen, but what a decline for him, a quick fall from grace, and sad to see him go, but certainly an impactful career and had a very high peak where he was among one of the best closers in the game. So a lot of us don't ever come that close at all to contributing to a major league roster and having that kind of a career. So good for you, Cody Allen. We will remember you fondly.
He was certainly a stud, and you're right. This is indicative of a larger movement. We're even seeing this with the Orioles right now, where Matt Harvey and Felix Hernandez have to compete out of spring training just to make the rotation. If you were to say this even 5 years ago, everyone on the planet would think you're insane, that these players would be towards the tail end of their career. Harvey had his peak, but then a couple of Tommy John surgeries and I think back issues as well really derailed his career. Felix Hernandez just had too many miles under his arm. He's been with the Mariners since he was 15 years old before heading to the Braves, and I don't even think he pitched an inning for the Braves since he opted out last season. This is really their last chance, and it's very sad because if they don't perform this year, then that could be it for them. And they're both have varying levels, but still levels of success in Major League Baseball.
It is kind of wild. A guy we call King Felix, who was a Cy Young winner, one of the best pitchers in the game, is now fighting for his life to make it in the Orioles rotation, one of the very worst rotations in all of baseball. And it's I don't know if players are just declining faster now, or if it's really is data driven, analytics movement driven. But it's weird. I guess the other half of this let the kids play equation is don't let the best play, get them out as quickly as possible. But it's kind of troubling, man, to see these guys we grew up on and who were such, huge parts of the game. Matt Harvey too. He was a Cy Younger and a little later on than King Felix, but it's kind of sad to see guys who have had such huge peaks, who have been such important parts of the game, to see them kind of phased out and almost just treated like dirty laundry. It's sad, and I don't know, maybe that's something the CBA as well. See if the game could try and take better care of the veterans.
I really want CBA to consider them more and try to give more power to the players. Of course, we're always for that. I don't think they'll really go on target with the older veterans. I would love to see that, but that will probably be a very, very minor part of the CBA if that does happen.
And it's such a tough balance to strike too, because a lot of the young players kind of get shafted too, and where you have like 5-6 seasons until you can first reach free agency, and you're making pre-arbitration money, and you're one of the best players in the game, but you're playing for under $1 million. So very tough to weigh those interests with the vets versus the young players, and it's a complex issue, one that we don't have the answers to, but hopefully the players union and the owners can get together and figure out something that works for everybody and can benefit all the young guys and great vets of the game and reward them for all that they've meant to the game. But while we're talking, I guess we weren't necessarily talking retire. Well, we did talk retirements with Cody Allen, not yet with Matt Harvey and Felix Hernandez. We should mention that the baseball legend Tim Tebow retired from the game as well.
Yeah, he had a really solid career in the minor. Or he didn't really have the best career, but he was trying for a lot of his minor league career with the Mets, and he made AAA. You got to give the man some credit. He didn't do this for clout. He's not a Russell Wilson, or I'm trying to think of some other minor league players who are trying to do both, or Kyler Murray, more Russell Wilson, who was just there for spring training, there to get some workouts in, and then go right back to football. This guy quit his football career to join baseball and stayed. It's not a Michael Jordan thing either. We're just going to basketball and tear up the NBA once again. So he deserves a lot of credit. He really tried to stick it out. And a lot of teams, even I think now president of the Mets, Sandy Alderson, said he reached a lot farther than we thought he would. So even though he batted, let's see what we have here. Didn't bat too high in AAA in 2019. Batted 163, which is pretty poor. But he still made it to AAA, which is an incredible feat, even for someone who is a former Heisman winner, former football star. And he's still at 18 homers in 287 games, so that's pretty respectable.
Certainly a credit to his athletic ability, and gotta respect his ability as a grinder to stick with it. And it wasn't just showing up for training camps. He was actually trying to make it as a baseball player. I do respect that. I will say where he differs from your Russell Wilsons, Kyler Murray's, Michael Jordan's is that those guys were actually good at the other sports that they played. Tim Tebow had to hate up for football because he didn't have what it took to make it as a quarterback in the NFL. So why not try baseball? Don't want to hate on Tim Tebow too much. I loved him as a member of the Denver Broncos. I loved that Tebow time year, and I appreciate him trying to make it happen in baseball as well. And it's maybe for the best that other guys who have a more legitimate shot at making it to the major leagues, the Mets can now use a AAA roster spot on them. I know Tebow was a good option for selling tickets, but ultimately, when you look at those stats, it was probably time for him to hang up, and he made the right call.
I agree. You got to think this is more mutual than Tebow just decided he wants to retire on his own, because then he probably would try to find another organization, and he still could if he wanted to. But I bet you the Mets and him just sat down and talked about it. It's like, hey, you've really tried for the last couple of years. We love the fact that you sold us ticket on minor league ballparks, but you're not really performing. We just got to let you go.
Well, now that Steve Cohen's in town too. We actually have a major league product, so there's really no shot at you making it.
Yeah. Yeah, he wouldn't do too well. I remember, I think it was a year or two ago where Matt Scherzer just struck him out with the three nastiest pitches, and Tebow had no chance. And that might be a little bit indicative of what his career would be like in the major leagues. Nevertheless, it's still a huge feat that he got to AAA. Don't want to hit him too much. I still remember doing the Tebow, just elbow to the knee in middle school when I was playing football with my buddies. So I got a lot of appreciation for the man. And then
it was certainly iconic. He created a meme before memes were even really a thing.
For sure. And then the last player that we should get to who retired is Brian Dozier. And Dozier also really just ended his career very quickly, because even a couple of years ago, in 2016, 2017, he led all second basemen in baseball in homers. He had 42 homers in 2016, 34 homers in 2017. He also had 5 consecutive years of 150-plus games played. He's a 2020 player back in 2014. Had a career 23.7 FWAR, just throwing all these stats at you. And even in 2019, he was still in a limited role, but he still had a very sound season with the Nationals. Last year, he didn't do too well with the Mets, but a lot of players didn't do too well in 2020 as well. So it's surprising that he would call it quits so soon.
Another guy who I thought could get a chance to make an impact somewhere, and he definitely had a great career. I can still remember the 40 home run Brian Dozier. It seems like only a couple years ago. I guess more like 4 or 5 years now. But I know batting average had always kind of been a struggle for him. So then maybe you get a little older, you lose some of the power, and you still have the 220 or so batting average floor that I guess you can kind of make sense of it, him not being around in the game. But I don't know, still only 33 years old. It's weird. It feels like he could have stuck around somewhere. Maybe he just, didn't want to take a minor league deal. Figured if he wasn't going to get any respect, then just call it quits and show him that way.
It probably would have been a hard road ahead for him. He probably could have made us a utility man somewhere, probably could have played a couple of different positions. It's tough. Not a lot of players have the Matt Harvey resolve to go through 4 different organizations and hope to have a resurgence in their career or just a chance at the major league level. Some players just know that their peak is over and just want to call it quits, which in all fairness makes sense because baseball is a very, very difficult sport and it's difficult to be among the elite.
And I can't really fault him either. I mean, I don't know much about Brian Dozier, but I'm sure that maybe he has a family, he's got kids that he wants to spend time with, and he's already made a great living in the game, and you've had a great career as a baseball player. So maybe now just ready to move on to the next phase of his life. And certainly don't fault the guys who still want to grind it out and keep trying for another couple of years. It's just everybody's different. Everybody's at a different stage of their life, and at the end of the day, you got to do what's best for you.
Yeah, just more power to him. He called it his career on his own, and not a lot of players seem to have the right to say that because they'll just keep trying and you just keep getting cut. So he knew it was time, and of course, from the Exit Velo family and the baseball community as well, we all wish Brian Dozier the best of luck. And then
Absolutely.
they're also
we enjoyed watching you, Brian, and we hope the next chapter is awesome.
Definitely. all good. It's tough with the lag, but it's a lot better than it was even 10 minutes ago. So we're working through it. So
thanks for bearing with me, man.
Yeah, no problem at all. So moving forward to some of our weekly roundups, JT Realmuto, who this offseason signed a 5-year, $115.5 million contract with the Phillies, has a broken thumb and will miss a month. He should be back by around opening day, and Philly should be all right. But I get the notion that some fans are probably going to be really pissed off by this. They're already pissed off by this, and they're like, hey, he's the best catcher in baseball. Why is he already injured? What did he do to hurt his thumb? And the Phillies are in a loaded NL East division, and this is not a good start for them.
It's not good news, but if I can play the optimist here, it's good timing in that it looks like he's going to be able to for opening day. And I saw a report come out today as well that he's going to be able to continue workouts with a cast on his thumb. And JT Realmuto was already so much head and shoulders above the rest of the catchers in the league that he might still be the best catcher in baseball, even with a broken thumb.
I agree. He has all the talent in the world, and he should be just fine. Broken thumbs are not the worst injury in the world. He should make a full recovery and have a great 2021 season and really bring the Phillies back into the playoffs. And I think I read this stat somewhere where the Phillies have had a string of consecutive losing seasons. It might be around 8 or so. And they're desperate to at least finish at 500 and even push for a playoff run at this point.
I didn't realize that. I still remember like the World Series Phillies, Chase Utley, Roy Halladay, Cliff Lee, all them. Ryan Howard. Wow, that's another blast from the past name. I didn't realize they'd lost for 8 years in a row now, and I guess maybe that's because they haven't completely bottomed out, haven't been all that terrible anywhere in that stretch. But they haven't really been all that great the last few years. So they'll need JT Realmuto and everybody else at full health to. Not obviously not full health. You're not going to have a full healthy 162 game season, but I mean, you'll need some things to break right for you to be able to get back to that former glory.
And to the Phillies' credit, they not only re-signed Realmuto and Gregorius, they also added to their bullpen this year too. So they are in a better position than last year, at least, to push for a playoff run. And speaking about a team pushing for a playoff run in the NL East, the Mets continue to add to their rotation. They signed Taijuan Walker to a 2-year, $20 million deal. Pretty hefty for a guy who didn't really pitch in 2019. Had a pretty solid 2020 season, but he's been very injury prone throughout his career with the Mets, now the Mets, and before then the Mariners, the Diamondbacks, and the Blue Jays. So this just adds to the Mets rotation. It's a nice depth piece. He'll probably slot a number 4 hole. But I got one question for you, Henry. Why didn't they sign Jake Odorizzi? I feel like the Mets could have afforded him. Probably wouldn't have cost too much more, and he's a bit more consistent than Walker.
I think Odorizzi would have made sense for them as well. And it's definitely a fair question, and the injury history is certainly not as alarming as what we see with Walker. You mentioned didn't pitch at all in 2019, also only threw 13 innings in 2018. So between that and a shortened 2020 season, this guy has like 60 innings on his arm over the last 3 years, which how much are you really going to ask him to stretch it out in 2020? And granted, he's not going to be asked to be the ace of the Mets or anything, but that is certainly a little bit concerning. And he was good last year in limited time in 2020, so I don't think it's a terrible signing for the Mets, adding a little bit of depth to that rotation, but I do think Odorizzi could have made more sense for sure. I mean, maybe it's that Walker is younger or had a better 2020 season with the recency bias paying off there, but certainly a fair question.
And I would understand maybe a 1-year, $5 million deal, but getting $10 million on average for a couple of years, that seemed like a very loaded contract for, as you mentioned, someone who has not pitched too often the last 3 years.
And we'll see. I mean, the Mets seem to always have pitchers themselves, or already before this deal, who end up getting hurt. We saw Syndergaard last year. Stroman opted out of the 2020 season. That's not exactly the same thing, but they struggle to keep pitchers on the field. Steven Matz, something they'd struggled with for years and years. DeGrom, at least he is the epitome of health and domination. So, I mean, he'll anchor that rotation one way or another, but maybe in the sense that you have this collection of guys, I think given that, it does make sense to go out, add depth, add to the back end of that rotation where you have Peterson, you have Lucchesi, just get more arms, more guys on deck to be able to roll with the injuries when they do happen.
I agree, because the Mets' original 5th starter before then would have been David Peterson, who has some upside, but Walker is probably a much better candidate than Peterson. And then they also have Seth Lugo, who can be a starting pitcher for them, who recently hit the DL last week with a broken bone. He'll be back in around 6 weeks. But having this extra starter now allows Lugo to go to the bullpen too, where it can be better utilized and strengthen that bullpen as well. So this was a nice move for the Mets. I think it's a bit of an overpay. And I think already the Mets had a better rotation than the Braves anyway. It's still a nice depth move, though.
And I appreciate you rounding it back, comparing to the Braves as well, because I agree. I do think they already had a better rotation to them, or better rotation than the Braves, even before adding Walker. But this is the icing on the cake, and perhaps could be something that sets them apart in that division race. I think the Mets pitching is that much stronger than Atlanta. The question is their pitching that much better than the Braves pitching to make up for how much better the Atlanta lineup should be? I mean, not that the Mets are going to have a bad lineup. There should be plenty good in its own right, but I don't know. I don't know what the bigger gap is.
It's tough to say. And I think a good measurement is that in a lot of predictions, not Picada, because Picada has been very weird placing the Braves fourth, but in some other predictions, they have the Mets and Braves separated by only a few games, which shows how close this divisional race should be. And that also probably means the gap between the Mets pitching and the Braves hitting is probably not too different.
That'll be a fun race to watch for sure this year, man. And not only that, we got the Nationals and the Phillies kind of on the periphery of that division as well, making it even more interesting. Even Marlins, man. They were competitive in 2020. They've got some upside players. It's going to be one of the more fun divisions to watch.
It probably is the best division in baseball. I wouldn't be completely surprised if all 5 teams finished over 500. I would probably see the Phillies and Marlins be barely over 500 right at it if they were to get over or be around that mark. But it would still be a very fun division to watch.
Who's your winner, if you have to say right now, Adam?
I want to believe in the Mets. I really do. I think that might be a bit more wishful thinking, but they really added to their bullpen as well. They added to their lineup. They added to their starting rotation. And I think the Braves really they're bringing back a similar rotation to last year, maybe 1 or 2 pieces who can really light up the Braves a bit. And they're bringing back Ozuna as well. So they'll be a better team than last year, I think, but I think the Mets will be a lot better than they were last year, and I think that's going to be the difference.
I would lean with you right now as well. Like you said, with projections, I think I agree it's going to be neck and neck. But if I'm picking a winner today, I think the pitching ends up being the difference. I think the Mets would be division winners. They'd be my pick at least, rather.
Yeah. We want to see the Mets back in the playoffs. It's been too long for them. But a lot of other teams are also trying to add to their pitching. You can never have too much pitching, of course. And the A's had a big signing this week, too. They signed Trevor Rosenthal, who had a great bounce-back year between the Royals and the Padres. He signed a 1-year, $11 million deal with the A's. And this is a huge signing for them because they allowed Liam Hendricks to walk. And I'm not exactly sure what Hendricks' figure is, but it wasn't that much more than Rosenthal. And he also had a start with the A's, so maybe he would have gotten a hometown discount. But $11 million is a huge signing for the A's, and it gives them a bona fide closer at the back end of their bullpen.
It is a lot of money for the A's. The Moneyball franchise who brought that to the forefront. Not usually big spenders and free agency. I wish we had Ben on tonight to kind of hear his thoughts on this move, but I do like in the context of replacing Liam Hendricks. I think that makes a lot of sense to go out there, try and get another guy who can fill that void, anchor the back end of that bullpen. I'm a little bit upset because I wanted to see Diekman get a chance to close games, and we're probably not going to see that now that we do have Rosenthal. But I mean, that's probably selfish on my end and kind of thinking from a fantasy baseball lens. But in terms of real baseball, it definitely makes sense to have as many high leverage arms in that bullpen as possible. And Trevor Rosenthal has certainly proven himself as such. So I think this is a great move to try and position yourself to keep pace with the Astros in the AL West.
I'm a little sad Diekman won't be closing too, because Diekman he's a freak lefty. He has this wild motion, hair's flowing everywhere. It's just peak Oakland A's reliever, throwing it back to Raleigh Fingers and Dennis Eckersley a little bit right there. And did not seem the closer role be a little bit sad, but A's fans will still get to see him pitch, and he'll still contribute, of course.
Yeah, it's good for real baseball for sure. It doesn't hurt to have both of those guys. Injuries happen, and production some certainly varies quite a bit with relief pitchers. So good to have options, and I think they will ultimately be happy to have both of them on board. And mentioned the price tag for Rosenthal, 1 year, $11 million. It's a good bit of money, but at least it's not, long-term crippling to your financial to the books. After this year, or maybe he has a great year and you re-sign him for another year. But it's not, I think with the Liam Hendricks deal, what did he get, like 5-6 years, something from the White Sox? Much more of a long-term commitment.
That's true. The A's are really not about long-term commitment. They're about short-term commitment, and this suits them, even though it's a larger deal. However, another team in the AL West had a longer commitment, and that was the Seattle Mariners. They signed Ken Giles to a 2-year, $7 million contract with a $9.5 million 2023 club option. So right off the bat, he's getting a pretty decent-sized contract for someone who didn't pitch a lot in 2020. But to have that large of a club option in a couple of years from now, that's what seems really eye-popping.
I love it too. I love Ken Giles getting this contract coming off Tom John surgery in September. He's almost definitely not going to pitch in 2021 now. The Mariners aren't going to have a playoff race to try and rush him back for or anything. So I think for his health, it makes a lot of sense for this destination. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of him being a high-end bullpen option who could make a difference for a contender who usually has more of a reason to acquire high-end bullpen options. But given that he's going to be out for this whole season, I do think it kind of makes sense from that regard. And I kind of like what the Mariners are doing, that even while looking to be one of the worst teams in baseball coming into this season, they're still trying to make some moves and position themselves for the future, as opposed to just outright tanking and trying to be as terrible as possible, which I like that. Maybe you take a couple steps forward this year, get some development from guys like Kyle Lewis and in the rotation as well. And maybe you have more use for a Ken Giles a year from now. And was that Paxton deal multiple years for them, Adam, or was that just the one season?
It was just the one season. Nevertheless, I hear what you're saying. The Mariners are being toolsy. They're bringing back a couple of guys. They probably won't be competitive this year, especially in a competitive AL West division as well. However, it can help them for years to come, and he's going to be with the Mariners for a couple of years. And we're also seeing this with other teams as well. The Royals and Tigers, for example, will probably also not be making the postseason this year, but they're adding a couple of veterans. They're being a little bit competitive. Maybe they can flip them later on. They can help them in the interim. So it's a nice little signing for the Mariners.
I love that point there too. That you can flip these guys at the deadline. Probably not Ken Giles coming off the injury, but certainly James Paxton, if he comes back and has a good start to the season, he's somebody you can flip, bolster that farm system further, and hopefully accelerate the rebuild. And I'm glad to see other teams kind of taking that approach as well. And it just makes it more interesting to have more teams, at least with somewhat decent players. It's good for baseball.
Mm-hmm. It's also really good for baseball that teams are really taking a chance on all these relievers. And of course, players who are really good, like Springer and Bauer, will always get paid. But relievers can always be a little bit hard to come by. They're inconsistent a lot of the times. It's hard to have relievers really good for a long period of time. Nevertheless, the Padres also had a couple of relievers this week as well. They added Mark Melancon to a 1-year, $2 million deal in 2021. He also has a $2 million mutual option in 2022 or a $1 million buyout. And they had Keon Kela for a 1-year, $1.2 million deal. And the Padres, they don't have the best bullpen after Kirby Yates left and Trevor Rosenthal left as well. But they have a nice couple of low-cost additions that can be very rewarding. And they still have an above-average bullpen. It might not be what the Indians' bullpen was a couple of years, for example, but it still remains competitive with what the Dodgers have.
I like their bullpen, and I like going out and getting these guys closing experience, both Melancon and Kela. I think that helps a lot. And even with losing Kirby Yates, you still have Emilio Pagan in that bullpen. You still have Drew Pomeranz as well, who I will probably get the majority of the save chances as it sits for them right now. Maybe Lanson can work his way into that conversation as well. But it's not a below average bullpen by any means. Definitely in the above average category with some upside with some of these former closers as well. So I think they should at least be able to keep pace with the Dodgers and as it relates to the bullpen.
And the Dodgers still, of course, have a bit of an advantage offensively and through their starting pitching, but the Padres are keeping it close. The Dodgers are not better than them by all that much. They're still the favorites. They'll still probably win the division by 6 games or so, but the Padres are keeping pace.
That's going to be another fun division race to watch, man, and not quite as deep as the NL East, but at the top, man. Padres versus Dodgers, each with the case to be made that they could be one of the very best teams in baseball, if not the very best team in baseball. But that'll be definitely one to keep our eyes on as well. So very, very much looking forward to watching some Padres-Dodgers games this year.
I would say at this point, I would probably put the Dodgers at number 1, Padres number 2, perhaps at number 3. It could be the Yankees. They seem to have an underrated offseason. Their offseason got a little bit better by re-signing their longest tenured Yankee, Brett Gardner, to a 1-year deal in the $3 to $4 million range. And Gardner, of course, has been around with them forever, since 2008. This will be his 14th season with them. He's going to be backup for Clint Frazier. Boone already announced that Frazier getting the starting left field job. Nevertheless, Yankee fans are happy that he's returned. He's a great leader, great presence, good defender. He can still hit a little bit and run a little bit too. So it's nice to see that him and the Yankees have a reunion.
Great segue going to the Yankees off the conversation for best teams in baseball. I was thinking them as number 3 as well. So I think that is an appropriate segue and good move bringing back Brett Gardner. I know that Boone had gone out and already said Frazier is going to be the starting left fielder. I think that is a good move for the team. The kid play, and we've seen Frazier be awesome in somewhat limited time. So let him get a whole 162 and see what he can do. But still great to have a guy like Gardner, veteran, around. Going to be 37. He'll turn 38, I think, towards the end of next year. But I kind of was of the thinking that he was pretty much done. I pulled up his baseball reference page and found that was very much not the case. Like you said, Adam still hitting for a little bit of pop, still able to run, still playing good defense. I think he is pretty serviceable as far as backups go in the outfield, which is kind of remarkable for a man at his age. You're talking about that's getting phased out of the game, but Brett Gardner is still very much holding his own as going to be 38-year-old.
I would even dare to say that if he wasn't the Yankees, he could probably start for a variety of teams. Because even in the playoffs last year, he got the starting time over Clinton Frazier. That's how good he was. And he knows how to catch fire when he needs to. He's one of the more clutch Yankee players in recent memory. And I think that's why I was so annoyed, and so many Yankee fans are annoyed that it took them so long to re-sign him. He only signed for $3 or $4 million. Last year, he got a 1-year, $12.5 million deal. So he took a massive, massive pay cut just to stay with his hometown team. The Yankees could have signed him anytime they wanted to, but they probably just want to make sure that they're in the right place with their payroll. It's still kind of disrespectful to him, though.
I would agree. It's not a great look. I know we discussed earlier that they had, and like you said too, they just gave him like the perfect amount where they could fit under the salary cap, make it work for the payroll. So maybe a little bit disrespectful there to not give full worth to a guy who's meant so much to that team, who's been around for so long, and a veteran leader in the clubhouse. But sadly, kind of seems to be the way the game is trending. Teams don't really care to keep around their vets and pay them for what they have done. It's more and more being paid for what you're expected to do from here on out. And for better or worse, that just appears to be the way the game is moving.
I should also note the Yankees have a history with this as well, because they really did the same thing to Bernie Williams, who meant so much to their organization, wanted to play in his final, what would have been his final year. And the Yankees said, no, we're just going to have two guys off the bench. You're a switch hitter. We're getting a lefty and a righty just to take your place. And they did terrible. And Williams, who wants to be Yankee for life, just retired. And Yankees know that how much the Yankee legacy means to these players. It means more to them than Gardner probably did to the Yankees, which is, I know, a bit of a bold statement, but it's probably true. And he let the Yankees just kind of give him a smaller contract. So Gardner is a true hero here. He's a true Yankee, and he did this for the fans. He did this because he wants another crack at a World Series, and he probably wants to retire as a Yankee as well. And this could be his final year.
And good for him too, kind of going out on his own terms, being with the team he wants to be, even if it does mean taking a pay cut. I think that's something to be said for cementing your legacy and sticking with your squad. So good for you, Brett Gardner. I love the Bernie Williams mention as well. I remember him watching him in like the 2004, 2005 or something home run derby is pretty much the extent of my Bernie Williams experience, but a name that I do know.
One of the more famous Yankees, and hopefully Gardner will join him in Monument Park someday. However, now it is time for our top 10 second baseman list. It's not as exciting as shortstops, but there's still a lot of differentiation that we have between our lists, and I'll go ahead and start off. My number 10 pick is Mike Moustakas. He's always been a lock for 30 home runs. He's very consistent with his power. His on-base percentage actually been better the last couple of years, but still below average, still around the 320, 330 mark. He moved over to second base, so he's a bit of a below-average defender, but not by too much. You pretty much know what you're getting out of Moustakas, and he kind of deserves to be at number 10. He's not the best player, but he's solid and deserves to crack this list.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that it is not quite the strong position that shortstop is, because a guy like Mike Moustakas probably wouldn't be in the top 10, certainly wouldn't be in the top 10 of the shortstop position, but a guy who deserves to be in that conversation here for second base for sure. I actually have him ranked a little bit higher up on my list. And I think most of the reason that I did that is because his ability as a power hitter, I think, kind of separates him from a lot of the top guys at this position. And I think he's actually a pretty serviceable defender for a dude who's supposed to be a third baseman. So I've got a little bit more love for Moustakas, but my number 10 was going to be somebody who I see on your list. So I'm not going to spoil it yet. I actually had to change mine at the last minute for somebody else that you have on your list, because I looked at your rundown and looked at the stats on him, and Dave Fletcher, I think, is certainly deserving to be mentioned in the top 10 conversation. I know he hasn't done it for too long of a time, but 319 batting average last year. It was a shortened season, but he had a 290 the year before. There's not much pop in that bat, but the fielding is at least average, close to it, and batting up around 300 at a not super strong position. I think that can go on the top 10. So David Fletcher on my list at number 10.
Fletcher's an absolute stud, and I really love this type of hitter who has great contact skills. It's great for the game. He's not going to have a lot of power. It kind of almost reminds me of a Ben Revere, someone who you're going to have a lot of good defense, decent speed, solid contact skills, and that's what Fletcher is. And he's going to be at top of a very powerful, or rather powerful, Angels order that features Trout and Ohtani and Rendon. So, and he's been doing this for now 3 years. So he still has a ways to go before he can really prove himself officially, but he's getting there, and he deserves to crack this list. He's a little bit higher on mine. So I see where you're coming from. I'm putting him number 10. For me, though, at number 9, I put Cesar Hernandez. I think he's the most underrated second baseman in baseball. He has a career 355 on base percentage. In the past, he's had 2 3-WAR seasons. He's an above average runner, above average defender. He doesn't have a lot of power. He'll maybe hit 10 to 15 home runs. And he's still proven that he's very serviceable. Re-signed with the Indians. Nice little deal for them. And he deserves to crack this list as well.
and Caesar is actually going to be number 10. If I'm extending my list out, he would have been my number 11. Ultimately, I went with Fletcher over him. I think the things that I like about Hernandez, I like a little bit more about Fletcher. The contact ability, certainly, and they're a good OBP guy, which I do like Hernandez's power a little bit more. So it's close. I definitely get what you heard from, including him there. But number 9 for me was Jorge Polanco, who I think has been a little bit underrated for the last couple of years. He's got a little bit of pop in his bat. He can get 15 to 20 home runs. We saw 22 for him in 2019, and pretty good batting average guy as well. A career 278 mark. Saw that hit as high as 295 in 2019 in the middle of that Bomba Squad Twins lineup. He gives you pretty good counting stats all around. And the defense hasn't always been great at shortstop, but moving over to second base this year with the addition of Andrelton Simmons, I think we'll expect to see that glove get a little bit better at second base. It happens for a lot of former shortstops that end up moving or changing positions. So I feel pretty good about Jorge Polanco at number 9.
I'm happy you mentioned his defense because I just left Polanco off my list. I flirted between him and Hernandez and Fletcher and even Wand a little bit. Wand and Polanco did not make my top 10. They were very, very close, and Polanco had a very good year a couple of years ago. The reason why I left him off was because he hasn't been very consistent with it. And I hope you're right. I hope he does better at second base, and I think that power can return as well. And you can very well prove me wrong. He could be a top 10 second baseman by the year's end, of course. Then with number 8, we already mentioned him. That was David Fletcher, just another type of Ben Revere. It's almost like a DJ LeMahieu without power and just a good guy at the top of the order. I hope his on-base percentage stays too. He had a 376 on-base percentage in 2020. If he can keep that up, then he really does deserve to be at the top of the lineup, especially with his speed and his contact skills.
Yeah, certainly deserving to be in that conversation. And a guy who kind of seems like he came out of nowhere. So a feel-good story seeing David Fletcher succeed, and a guy we'll be rooting for going forward. My number 8 is a guy you mentioned kind of on the periphery of your list. Didn't quite make it. But Colton Wong, I had to go in and throw at number 8. And part of the reason I did that is I'm going through researching my list. I'm seeing all these guys are like roughly edge defenders. Like, who is really good at defense at this position? And I think Colton Wong is arguably the best defender at second base in all of baseball. So I had to give a little bit of a nod to the glove there. And the bat isn't atrocious by any means. He's a career 261 hitter, and he's shown even better contact abilities than that in certain years. I think moving out to Miller Park is going to help that bat a little bit. And he's shown he can hit some home runs here and there. So maybe the power upticks there for him. Maybe he's an Christian Yelich, the next guy who really takes off after joining the Brewers. I'm obviously kidding there. I don't think he's Christian Yelich, but I think that Milwaukee can certainly help the bat. And so I mostly glove related is why I went with Colton Wong at number 8, but not terrible on offense either.
He's about an average offensive contributor, but I think with the Brewers, because of how much they let Christian Yelich steal, they may let Wong steal a bit more too. He's had 20-plus stolen bases in the past, and if he can continue his good on-base percentage, then he could still be within that margin as well. I think, once again, the reason why I kept him off my list was because he's been a bit inconsistent throughout his career. He really had that one tremendous season with the Cardinals where he won his first Gold Glove, and the defense has always been pretty consistent. So I understand why you put him in the top 10. He can certainly be there. As for my number 7 pick, I put Jake Cronenworth. And this was a tough decision for me because he is going to split time with KBO star Ha-Seong Kim, who's a 30-20 player, 900-plus OPS in the Juice KBO Baseball League. So he's going to split some time, especially with Kim getting a multi-year deal. However, Cronenworth was second rookie year voting. FanGraphs still thinks that he's going to have a very good season, get the majority of playing time, and he's a very good defender. He could be a 10-10 player and have an 800-plus OPS, so he still cracks the list, but he's almost like an asterisk because I would not be surprised if Kim beats him for playing time or Cronenworth, excuse me, declines a little bit after his Rookie of the Year campaign.
And it was an amazing season for him last year in his rookie campaign, batting 285. He was worth 1.6 WAR. Not a whole lot of power in the bat, but you see that develop oftentimes later for guys. So not huge concern there. He will be 27 years. A little bit of a late bloomer getting up to the big leagues. Ultimately, playing time was why I had to leave Cronenworth off of my list. I think not only Austin Kim, you got to worry about Jerks and Profar, who the Padres committed like $20-something million to him as well. So I think it's kind of a mess there, and they have like 3 super utility guys between the 3 of them. And I do think Cronenworth is going to end up playing some out as well. But it was playing time why I left him off my list. But yet, if he had a full-time job like these other guys on the list who were listing, he would have been pretty high up on my list as well, especially at a position that you mentioned is not the strongest. But number 7 for me was Marcus Semien, which it kind of is. He's another case of one guy who's had like one really, really strong season, and that was 2019, where he had 33 homers, a 892 OPS. He got 285, and then kind of came crashing down to earth in the 2020 season, which we've said all along, kind of a weird season. We don't want to hold that too much against anybody, but I think the real Semien is somewhere in between those 2019 and 2020 numbers. He's, of course, joining the Blue Jays, where I think the counting stats are going to look very strong for him, and another guy moving over to second base, where you'd expect the defense to improve.
We have similar lines of thinking because Marcus Semien on my list places at number 6, and I'm also glad that you mentioned the counting stats too, because the Blue Jays have a very powerful lineup that got better this year with the acquisition of George Springer. So he will look very good. And Semien, he's really changed around defensively. I give him a lot of credit for that, because I remember a few years ago, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I would say, he committed the most errors in baseball. He didn't look very comfortable at all at shortstop. He's being moved over to second base now. So his defensive capability might be even better this time around, and he still should be a good bet to 20 home runs, especially in short ball parts in the AL East too.
Absolutely, man. And I think that a rebound certainly from 2020 is in order for Marcus, and it's going to be hard not to with that great lineup around him in Toronto. So looking forward to seeing how he looks in that Blue Jays uniform. I know Ben Ross is probably not looking forward to that so much, missing out on him and in his uniform. But number 6 for me is another AL East guy, Brandon Lowe, who I would have had a little bit higher up on my list if there was any one thing where he really stuck out. The thing is, he's very good all-around player. He hits for pretty good pop, pretty good average, pretty good defensive player. It's just there's like no one thing where I can point and say Brandon Lowe is great at this, which, to be fair, there's not necessarily that thing for a lot of these guys on the list. Not a super, super strong position. He did have a 916 OPS in 2020, though, so that could be a sign of more greatness to come for Brandon Lowe. He's only going to be 26 next year, too, so very young. We know the Rays have a way of maximizing the talent of their players, so could be he's shown signs of being a superstar. And he's been a little bit streaky as well. It's been really, really hot flashes versus times where he's kind of fallen off the face of the earth. So maybe consistency would be the key and putting it all together for Lowe. But I feel pretty good about him at number 6, and I think that's kind of ranking him closer to his floor than his ceiling.
I would agree with that. I do have him a little bit higher. And you're right, he's a little bit inconsistent too, because he had a tremendous regular season with the Rays last year, but in the playoffs, he was a completely different person. He didn't really hit at all. He has all the power in the world, though. He has 37 home runs in 180-plus games at the major league level. He can be a pretty good defender as well, but he strikes out a lot. I think it's just 2 years ago that he had a 34% strikeout rate or so, and that's why he's rightly not too high on either of the lists. Still up there, though, and he still has a lot of potential. Then moving on to number 5, I have Jeff McNeil. And I love McNeil. He's one of those great middle infield players that if you had to make from scratch, he would fit the bill. He's a pure hitter, but he's had a power surge in the past too. In 2019, had 20-plus home runs. And he's got an average defender at second base as well. So he will bat around 300. He will probably play about average defense. The thing is, will his power surge continue in 2021? If he can get there, he might even be a little bit higher on my list as well.
I have no arguments to any of the breakdown there on McNeil. I feel pretty much the same way about him as well. Love the batting average, and I think he kind of gets hated on for his defense a little bit. But when you look at the numbers, it is pretty much league average. And I think the Mets are going to have much improved infield defense. You got Francisco Lindor helping him out up the middle there as well. So excited to see McNeil, and that lineup is that much better with Lindor too. Yeah, some of the counting stats perhaps getting a little bit better for him. But number 5 for me was somebody I know you had a little bit higher up on your list. Was Mike Moustakas, which I ranked him up there. It was kind of my ding on Brandon Lowe. I said that there isn't any one thing that I could point to. You mentioned the power numbers. I may have actually been mistaken about that, but power was really the reason that I did have Moustakas rated here. He's been a 30 home run guy a couple times over his career. He hit 38. That was all the way back in 2017, but he did hit 35 in 2019. And it was a weird season for him in 2020. I keep saying that again and again. It was a weird season, but that is a great ballpark for his skill set in Cincinnati. That's a place where you could maybe even flirt with 40 home runs. The batting average isn't great for Moustakas, pretty consistently right around that 250 mark. But that's okay. I mean, he can be in that area with good power and playing average defense at second base, which I should mention again, he's a third baseman by trade, so playing out of position there and doing it admirably. I like Mike Moustakas at number 5, and I think he could be in line for a big year in Cincinnati.
He's always been a very respectable player. He was on the Royals' 2015 World Series run. He's always been a good power hitter. He used to be a really good defender at third base. Moving under second base, his defense took a little bit of a hit, but not too many guys would sign a 4-year, $64 million deal to play out of position like that. So very ballsy on his part, and got to give him a lot of credit. Then moving on to number 4, that's where I have Brandon Lowe, and I think it's over between Lowe and Moustakas for the most power of any second baseman in the game. And Lowe, even though he hasn't played really a full season yet, I'm excited what he can do over 162 games because, as I mentioned, 37 home runs, 181 career games. So he can still be a 30-homer threat in 162.
Does need to cut down on those strikeouts, too, as you mentioned the first go around. That'll be a big key to him kind of unlocking that value in his offensive production. But the power does look legit, as I'm glad you mentioned Adam. I was kind of sleeping on his power. I hadn't looked at the full picture there, but he definitely has more there than I was giving him credit for. So I appreciate you giving that perspective, and will be interesting to see him in that Rays lineup. Number 4 for me, Jeff McNeil. I know a guy we covered pretty well already. I don't really have too much to add there. I was surprised to see that he does have a career OPS of 884, which pretty high for a dude who really only has that one outlier power season in 2019 where he hit 23 homers in 2019. That the power kind of seemed to evaporate in 2020 with only 4 home runs. So that'll be something that I'm looking for in McNeil for 2020 and see if that power was legit from 19 or if he is really just a high batting average guy.
I think a reasonable estimate for him could be around 15 home runs. And he does hit a lot of extra base hits. He does have a pretty high on base percentage. That's probably why his OPS is close to 900. He's a great contributor, and there's a lot of reason to believe that he's the number 4 best second baseman. Then moving on to number 3, we actually both have the same guy, and it's Jose Altuve. And my respect in the last couple of years for Altuve has really gone down because I'm a little person. I'm only 5'3". Altuve is 5'6". I used to play second base, so I relate to Altuve on that personal level. They call him the little Venezuelan for a reason. But since not getting the sign stolen on his behalf, he really did not do well in 2020. Completely different Jose Altuve. He should still be able to bounce back, though. He doesn't steal as much as he used to, but around a 300 hitter, 20-plus home runs, and OPS north of 800. Once again, the second base position isn't all too talented, and this is one of the reasons why Altuve is firmly entrenched, number 3 spot.
And it's interesting, too, because for years and years, if we were doing this episode, we would have given Altuve as no doubt number 1 at the position. And there was a case to be made for a little while. He's the number 1 player in all of baseball. He was being debated with Mike Trout only like 3 or so years ago. But he has kind of gone downhill a little bit over the last couple of years. And he hasn't bottomed out by any means. I have him as number 3 on my list as well. And that's for a reason. But, I mean, the batting average it's been very strong still. I know last year it was 219. Weird season. That's my catchphrase as we're talking about 2020. But when you look back, it's like 5 of the 6 years, 5 of the last 6 years, he's had an over 300 batting average, I believe. Or it's 4 of the last 6, and then the other was 298, and that was 2019. But home run power has been something that Altuve has kind of picked up on in the last couple of years. He had 31 in 2019, but I am interested to watch him and kind of still evaluate the fallout of that cheating scandal, the sign stealing scandal for the Astros. The old buzzer taped on his chest was for Altuve. Because I mean, you just look at 2020 numbers. Maybe that's not a weird season thing. Maybe that's he was cheating and now he doesn't have that advantage and he's not as good thing. So I know that's something I mentioned for Carlos Correa as well. We're breaking down shortstop. So keep an eye on Jose Altuve. I mean, he's only 31 years old. One thing that we do know, like you mentioned, Adam, the speed does seem to be declining pretty rapidly. And that was part of what made him such a great dynamic player. Still feel good about him at number 3, though.
Yeah, he still should be impressive. I don't know if we're going to see him at 31 home runs again or steal 30 bases again or even 20 or possibly even 10, because that's kind of where the game is heading. Once you develop power, you kind of sacrifice your speed. Still an above average base runner, though, for the most part. And then moving to number 2, this guy has a great blend of power and speed, probably perhaps more so than any other second baseman. And this is Ozzie Albies. And honestly, he doesn't get talked about all too often. But from 2018 to 2019, he was essentially a 25 homer guy, 15 stolen bases, an above average defender. So he should be able to go back to that. He didn't do quite the same in 2020, but it was a weird year for everyone, as we keep saying, and Albie should be right back into form.
And he missed time in 2020 as well. And that was part of the reason why the numbers ended up not looking so great. Still bad, 271. So credit to him for being able to do that. 773 OPS, which for the clear outlier down year of your career, that's not too bad. That's kind of like the best year for a lot of these guys we have listed here. Ozzie Albies is number 2 on my list as well. I love that he's able to do a little bit of everything. The power speed combo is awesome. The batting average is usually very strong as well. Plays pretty awesome defense for the Braves. Only going to be 24 years old next season. So I expect that maybe as early as next year. And when we do our position preview, I'll be listing Albies as number 1. I take it we must have the same number 1, though, Adam, as we have yet to mention him at this point in the podcast. And given that he plays for your Bronx Bombers, why don't you go ahead and do the honors of breaking the news who our number 1 second baseman is?
I really do appreciate it, Henry. I love this guy with all my heart. He is the machine. His name is DJ LeMahieu. And again, a lot of credit to Ozzie Albies. In a couple of years, he might surpass DJ LeMahieu because he's much younger, and LeMahieu's base running skills and defensive skills are starting to erode, but he's still pretty passable in that age. But what really is his bread and butter is his offense. Should still have about 20 home runs. He finished top 5 in MVP the last 2 years, won the batting title this year, first player ever do so in both leagues since the expansion era. So he's incredible. He fits perfectly at the top of the Yankees lineup, and I'm really happy, of course, that they signed him, and he is very deserving of being the best second baseman in the game.
You said it. There's not much more I can say other than the numbers you broke down there, Adam, and all that he means to that Yankees lineup. Going into this, I wanted to try and make a case for Albies at number one, but you just look at the stats LeMahieu was put up over the last couple of years, the MVP finishes. There's just no way I could have done it. He batted .364, getting the batting title last season. He got .421 on base percentage, absolutely ridiculous. A 1.011 OPS. The average and the on base percentage were all best in baseball last season. He's an absolute beast at the plate. He is absolutely a machine. The glove is still pretty – it's at least average for him, and he has defensive versatility, and then he can play first base, he can play third base, so I think that's a plus for him as well. Perhaps benefits from the park, how it is Yankee Stadium, but, hey, it's perfect for his skill set. It's perfect for his swing, and can't fault a guy for making, the most of that and maximizing his value with where he plays. So DJ LeMahieu is a no-brainer at number one.
He does take advantage of that right field porch, I'll have to say. There's a reason why his home run total has increased. And it's really interesting, once again, because he's not the best defensive second base from this list. He's not even the best runner on this list either. But he's just so much better offensively than everyone on this list that it just skyrockets his WAR. He was on pace for a 7.5 WAR this year if it was a full season, and that's how good this guy is. So he's very deserving, and there's pretty much he's the one clear answer to the second baseman list.
And that's interesting too, because, where we've been with the other position previews, Adam, I don't think there's been necessarily one slam dunk answer for who has to be number one on the list. It's maybe the first time, or other than probably whenever we did like Christian Yelich or Mike Trout. So maybe there's been a couple slam dunks, but it's been in the infield, there hasn't been a clear answer. I suspect we will get one next week with first base, unless we're including Cody Bellinger, which we probably will be, right? We'll be allowed to talk Bellinger in first base.
Maybe. I feel like Bellinger more takes over at center field and Muncy takes over at first. So we probably are both thinking the same first baseman for now. We will reveal that in next week's episode where we take on the top 10 first baseman, and it'll be just even more closer to baseball and spring training. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Henry, for working through your technical difficulties. I know those not easy, and thank you to the audience, of course, for staying with us. And until next time, this is the Exit Velo podcast.